The wrong target. The roar of a motorcycle echoed through the dimly lit parking lot of a gas station on the outskirts of town. The neon sign flickered above, casting eerie shadows on the cracked pavement. A black-clad biker, muscular and covered in tattoos, pulled up near the entrance. His helmet visor snapped open, revealing a rough, unshaven face with a cruel smirk. Near the vending machine, a teenager in a hoodie and jeans stood alone, sipping a soda. His hair was slightly messy, and he looked like any other high school kid, scrawny, unassuming, an easy target. His backpack lay on the ground beside him. The biker, whose name was Rocco, had been in and out of trouble for most of his life. Extortion, intimidation, street fights, nothing new. Tonight, he was in a bad mood, and he wanted to take it out on someone. And this kid? He was perfect. Rocco kicked the stand of his bike and strutted forward, cracking his knuckles. "Hey, kid. You got a problem?" His voice was deep and gravelly. The teenager glanced up, his expression neutral. "No." Rocco sneered. "You sure? You were looking at me funny." The kid sighed and took another sip of his drink. "Wasn't looking at you at all." That annoyed Rocco. He stepped closer, towering over the boy. "I don't like your attitude." The teen finally looked up, his eyes calm, analyzing. "And I don't like your breath. You should try mints." Rocco froze for a second. A few feet away, two of his biker buddies snickered. His nostrils flared. "You think you're funny, huh?" Rocco grabbed the teen's hoodie and yanked him forward. "Let's see how funny you are when..." He didn't finish his sentence. Lightning fast, the teen's arm twisted around Rocco's wrist, breaking his grip. In one fluid motion, he stepped sideways, pivoted on his foot, and slammed his elbow into the biker's ribs. The impact sent a sharp jolt of pain through Rocco's body. Rocco stumbled back, stunned. The kid hadn't just fought back, he knew exactly what he was doing. "Bad idea," the teen said, rolling his shoulders. "Walk away." Rocco growled, furious now. He charged, swinging a wild punch. Big mistake. The teen ducked, sidestepped, and struck Rocco's knee with a precise sidekick. The biker collapsed onto one leg with a grunt. Before he could react, the kid grabbed his arm, twisted it into a painful joint lock, and slammed him face-first into the vending machine. Soda cans rattled from the impact. Rocco groaned, his cheek pressed against the cold metal. He tried to move, but the kid's grip was like steel. "You done?" the teen asked. Rocco was too shocked to answer. His biker buddies took a cautious step forward but hesitated. The teen didn't even glance at them, he just adjusted his grip slightly, making Rocco yelp in pain. "I'll take that as a yes," the teen said. He let go and stepped back. Rocco staggered, clutching his arm. His mind was racing. Who was this kid? The teen picked up his backpack, slung it over one shoulder, and started walking away. Then he paused, looked over his shoulder, and smirked. "By the way, next time, pick someone else." He walked off into the night, leaving Rocco standing there, humiliated and aching. The biker had picked the wrong target. And he knew he'd never make that mistake again. Rocco stood there, his heart pounding, pain radiating from his ribs and arm. The gas station parking lot, once his playground for intimidation, now felt suffocating. His biker buddies, Snake and Jax, stared in stunned silence. They had seen Rocco take down full-grown men in bar fights, but this scrawny teenager had dismantled him in seconds. Jax finally spoke. "Dude, what just happened?" Snake shook his head. "That ain't normal, man." Kid fights like a damn pro. Rocco's pride burned hotter than the pain in his body. He clenched his fists, but the memory of how effortlessly the teen had handled him made his stomach turn. He needed payback, badly. Get the bikes, Rocco muttered. We're following him. The hunt begins. The three bikers roared down the road, headlights slicing through the darkness. The teen walked calmly along the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, completely unfazed by the sound of revving engines creeping up behind him. Rocco grinned as he pulled up beside the kid. Hey, punk, he growled, his confidence returning with his friends backing him up. You think you're tough? The teen didn't even flinch. He glanced at them with that same unreadable expression. Still following me? That's cute. Jax laughed. Oh, you got a mouth on you, kid. But let's see how well you fight when it's 3-on-1. Rocco pulled out a switchblade, flicking it open with a metallic snick. Let's take this somewhere quieter. The teen finally stopped walking and turned fully toward them. His expression shifted, no fear, no anger. Just amusement. You really don't want to do this, he said, shaking his head. Snake scoffed. Oh yeah. Why not? The teen sighed. Because I'm being nice. And because you have no idea who you're messing with. Rocco had heard enough. He revved his bike and lunged forward, swinging the knife. But the kid was already moving. The reckoning. With supernatural reflexes, the teen sidestepped at the last second, grabbed Rocco's wrist, and twisted it. Hard. A sickening crack echoed as the knife clattered onto the pavement. Before Rocco could even scream, the kid yanked him off the bike, sending him crashing onto the road. Jax barely had time to react before the teen was on him. In a blur, he leapt onto the moving bike, delivered a devastating elbow strike to Jax's face, and sent him tumbling off his ride. The motorcycle skidded out of control, sparks flying as it scraped against the asphalt. Snake panicked. He reached for the gun tucked in his waistband. Too slow. The teen was already there, gripping Snake's wrist and forcing the gun skyward. A swift knee to the ribs knocked the air out of the biker, and a precise strike to the pressure point in his neck dropped him to his knees. The gun clattered to the ground. Silence. Rocco, groaning in pain, looked up at the kid. No, not a kid. Something else. Someone else. His moves weren't just fast, they were calculated, surgical. Every strike was meant to disable, every movement controlled. Snake wheezed. What the hell are you? The teen dusted off his hoodie and stepped back. I told you to walk away. Rocco, gasping, spat blood onto the road. Who are you? The teen studied him for a moment, as if debating whether to answer. Then, with a smirk, he said. Name's Jack. Jack Carter. Rocco's stomach twisted. That name, it wasn't just some random kid. Jack Carter was the son of Ryan Carter, a former military legend turned elite combat instructor. The kind of guy who trained killers. Rocco's mouth went dry. He had picked a fight with the son of a ghost. Jack turned to leave, then paused. He crouched next to Rocco, looking him dead in the eye. If I ever see you bothering anyone again, he said, voice calm but ice cold, I won't be this nice. Rocco felt real fear for the first time in years. As Jack walked away, disappearing into the night, Snake scrambled to his feet. Dude, he hissed, still clutching his ribs. We gotta go. Rocco, humiliated and broken, could only nod. He would never forget this night. And he would never cross paths with Jack Carter again. Rocco sat in his apartment, his body aching from the beating he had taken. His busted lips still stung, and every breath sent a sharp pain through his ribs. A bottle of whiskey sat half empty on the coffee table, next to a blood-stained rag he had used to wipe his face. Snake and Jax sat across from him, equally battered, their expressions a mix of anger and fear. For the past hour, none of them had spoken. Finally, Jax broke the silence. "We can't let this slide, man. We're gonna be a joke if word gets out." Snake nodded, rubbing his bruised wrist. "Yeah, but let's be real. That kid ain't normal. He took us apart like it was nothing." Rocco's jaw tightened. He had been in plenty of fights, had his fair share of run-ins with tough guys, but never had he been dismantled like that. Jack Carter was something else. But letting it go? That wasn't an option. "We find out where he lives," Rocco growled. "We don't fight him in the open. We make sure he never sees it coming." Jax raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to go after him again? I mean, what if he's got backup? His old man was some kind of military badass, right?" Rocco's expression darkened. "Then we make sure we hit first. Hard. Tracking the ghost." For the next 2 days, the bikers did their homework. They asked around, quietly, carefully. And eventually, they got a lead. Jack Carter didn't just train under his father. He lived with him. That meant the old man was still in the picture. Rocco didn't like that one bit. They found the house in the woods, about 10 miles out of town. Isolated. A perfect place for an ambush. They watched from a distance, hidden along the tree line. The house itself was nothing fancy, just a small cabin, a beat-up truck parked outside, a heavy bag hanging from a tree. But something about it felt off. Rocco lifted his binoculars, scanning the area. No movement. No security cameras. Looked easy enough. "Tonight," he muttered. "We go in after dark." The ambush that wasn't. The night was moonless, the forest thick with shadows. The bikers crept toward the cabin, their footsteps muffled by the dirt path. Rocco held a crowbar, Jax had a hunting knife, and Snake carried a tire iron. They reached the front door. Rocco raised his crowbar. And the door swung open before he could even touch it. Standing in the doorway was a man. Not Jack. Older. Taller. Broader. His presence alone was suffocating. His piercing eyes scanned them like a predator sizing up prey. His voice was calm, low, and terrifyingly steady. "You boys lost?" Rocco swallowed hard. He had never met Ryan Carter before. But he knew, instantly, this man was worse than Jack. Way worse. Jax took an instinctive step back. We were just." Ryan's hand shot out, grabbing Rocco by the collar. Before anyone could react, Rocco was yanked inside the cabin. The door slammed shut. Jax and Snake stood there, frozen. And then they heard it. The unmistakable sound of bones breaking. Followed by screaming. Then, silence. The door opened again. Ryan Carter stood there, calm as ever. "You two should go home," he said, his voice eerily polite. Jax and Snake didn't hesitate. They ran. Inside the cabin, Rocco lay on the floor, barely conscious, his arm twisted at an unnatural angle. Ryan crouched next to him. "You thought you were hunting my son," he said softly. "But you walked into my den instead." Rocco wheezed, unable to respond. Ryan stood up, his shadow looming over him. You're going to leave Jack alone. Forever. You're going to tell everyone that you never saw him. That you never met me. And if I even hear a whisper that you came looking for trouble again. He leaned down, voice barely above a whisper. I won't be this gentle. Rocco's vision blurred as darkness took him. The aftermath. The next morning, Rocco was found at a bus station, dumped there like trash. His arm was in a makeshift sling, his face bruised beyond recognition. When Snake and Jax finally caught up to him, he didn't say a word. He never spoke about Jack Carter again. And he never set foot in that part of town. Some fights? You just don't win. Some people? You just don't mess with. And the Carters? They were ghosts. Rocco never spoke about what happened that night. Not to Snake. Not to Jax. Not to anyone. But word spread. Nobody knew the full details, but something had changed in Rocco. The once arrogant bruiser, the guy who used to walk into bars like he owned the place, was suddenly avoiding fights. He barely spoke, kept his head down, flinched at loud noises. And more importantly, he wanted out of the biker crew. Snake and Jax were confused, but they weren't stupid. They had run from Ryan Carter that night, and even that felt too close for comfort. But Rocco? He had been inside. He had felt what it was like to be at the mercy of a man who wasn't just strong, he was something else. But walking away from the Black Vultures, their crew? That wasn't an option. Not when Bishop was still in charge. Enter Bishop. Bishop wasn't just some street thug. He was a legend. A former enforcer for a cartel, Bishop had carved his way through the criminal underworld with nothing but his fists and his mind. He wasn't just ruthless, he was smart. He built the Black Vultures into something more than just a biker gang. He turned them into a business. And in his world, nobody walked away without paying the price. So when word got back to Bishop that Rocco was trying to disappear, he wasn't pleased. Sitting in his warehouse, surrounded by crates of stolen goods, Bishop leaned back in his chair, rolling a cigar between his fingers. His cold, steel-gray eyes locked onto Snake and Jax. You're telling me Rocco wants out? He asked, voice calm. Snake swallowed hard. Yeah, boss. He ain't himself. Something happened. Bishop exhaled a thin stream of smoke. What happened? Jax hesitated. It's that kid. Jack Carter. And his old man. The room went silent. Bishop's fingers stopped rolling the cigar. Ryan Carter. That name wasn't unknown to him. Years ago, before Bishop had built his empire, Ryan Carter had been on his radar. Back when Ryan was still active, when he was a hunter. The kind of man sent to eliminate people like him. Most of those guys were government-trained killers who disappeared when their contracts ended. But Ryan Carter? He didn't just disappear. He became a ghost. Bishop had never wanted to cross paths with him. Ever. But now, the Carters had humiliated one of his men. And in Bishop's world, that was unacceptable. You find them, Bishop said, voice steady. Both of them. The son and the father. Jax and Snake shared an uneasy glance. Boss. Snake hesitated. Are you sure? I mean, this ain't like the other guys we've dealt with. Bishop's cold eyes narrowed. That wasn't a question. No more arguing. No more hesitation. A war was coming. And Bishop intended to win. Meanwhile, Jack Carter sat on the porch of his family's cabin, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. The morning air was crisp, the sound of birds filling the silence. Across from him, Ryan Carter stood near a wooden training dummy, methodically wrapping his hands. His movements were precise, controlled, dangerous. Jack watched as his father threw a single punch. The wood cracked from the impact. Jack smirked. "You didn't have to break Rocco like that, you know." Ryan didn't look up. "If I wanted to break him, he wouldn't have walked away." Jack took a sip of his coffee. "Fair." A silence stretched between them. Then Ryan finally spoke. "They'll be coming." Jack didn't ask how he knew. His father was always ahead of the game. Always watching. Always aware. Jack's fingers tightened around his mug. "You think it's Bishop?" Ryan nodded. "He won't let this go. Men like him never do." Jack exhaled slowly. He had grown up hearing stories about Bishop, a man who built an empire on violence and fear. If Bishop wanted revenge, he wouldn't send small-time enforcers. He'd send killers. Jack set his cup down and stood up, stretching. "Guess we should get ready, then." Ryan finally looked at him, a ghost of a smirk on his lips. "We already are." Jack glanced at the tree line, where barely visible tripwires ran between the trunks. Near the cabin, buried just beneath the dirt, pressure-sensitive explosives were set in strategic locations. And hidden beneath the floorboards of their home? Enough firepower to take down a small army. Bishop and his men thought they were hunting. But they were walking into a trap. A war was coming. And the Carters were waiting. The Black Vultures move in. Bishop didn't do things halfway. When he made a move, it was calculated, precise, and overwhelming. That's why, 3 nights after Rocco's failed ambush, 7 men rode out toward the Carter cabin. They weren't just bikers, they were Bishop's best enforcers. Ex-military. Ex-cartel. Ex-everything. Armed to the teeth. Ready to send a message. Bishop didn't come himself. He didn't need to. The team was led by a man named Cruz, a brutal ex-mercenary with scars on both knuckles from years of bare-knuckle fighting. Cruz had only been given one instruction. Make them disappear. As the vultures rode through the darkened forest road, Cruz glanced at his men. They were good. Tough. Hardened killers. And yet, something in his gut felt wrong. It was too quiet. Too still. No animals. No sounds. No wind. The forest was watching them. Cruz tightened his grip on his rifle. Focus. The kid is just a punk. His old man is out of practice. This is just another job. But deep down, he knew this wasn't going to be just another job. The first mistake. The moment the vultures crossed onto Carter land, the game changed. The first biker hit a hidden spike strip. His front wheel exploded, sending him flipping end over end like a rag doll. He crashed hard, motionless. The others barely had time to react before the second trap triggered. Boom! A buried flashbang mine detonated, bathing the forest in searing white light. The shockwave sent 2 more riders tumbling off their bikes, clutching their ears, blind and disoriented. Cruz swore, skidding his bike to a stop. "This isn't a cabin," he growled, dragging a dazed vulture back to his feet. "This is a kill box." And then, from the tree line, a voice called out. "Calm. Steady. You should have stayed home." Cruz turned sharply, his rifle snapping up. Too late. A figure moved through the shadows like a phantom, too fast to track. Before Cruz could even process what was happening, his gun was wrenched from his grip. A fist struck his jaw with surgical precision. His vision blurred as pain exploded through his skull. He staggered back. His attacker stepped into the dim moonlight. Jack Carter. Jack unleashed. For the first time since this all started, Jack wasn't holding back. Cruz barely had time to steady himself before Jack moved. 1 second he was standing still. The next? He was inside Cruz's guard. A brutal knee to the gut. A precise strike to the throat. A palm strike to the jaw. Cruz had fought some of the deadliest men in the world. But in that moment, he felt like he was drowning. Jack wasn't just fast. He was trained. Cruz barely managed to block a follow-up strike, stumbling back toward his remaining men. And then, from behind the cabin, the real nightmare arrived. Ryan Carter. The Reaper awakens. Ryan moved through the remaining vultures like a ghost. No wasted movement. No hesitation. One grabbed his pistol, Ryan snatched his wrist and snapped it like a twig before delivering a crushing elbow to his temple. Another lunged at him with a knife, Ryan caught his arm, twisted it out of socket, and sent him crashing into a tree. The fight lasted less than 20 seconds. By the time Cruz blinked through the pain in his jaw, his entire team was either unconscious, broken, or wishing they were dead. Only 2 men were still standing. Cruz and Jack Carter. Cruz spat blood onto the dirt, shaking his head in disbelief. "You little bastard," he growled. Jack smirked. "You done?" Cruz clenched his fists. He could barely breathe. His ribs were cracked. His vision blurred. But he wasn't going back to Bishop as a failure. So he did the only thing left. He drew his knife and charged. The final lesson. Jack didn't move. He didn't need to. Because before Cruz could even take 2 steps, Ryan Carter stepped in front of his son. And for the first time that night, Ryan spoke. "Put it down." Cruz froze. Not because he wanted to. Not because he was afraid of Jack. But because of Ryan's eyes. There was no anger in them. No hatred. Just calculated certainty. Like a predator deciding whether the kill was worth the effort. Cruz had seen death before. He had fought men who thought they were killers. But Ryan Carter? He wasn't a man. He was something else entirely. Cruz's fingers trembled. The knife felt heavy in his grip. He dropped it. Ryan's voice was calm. "Tell your boss to forget this ever happened." Cruz panted, his whole body shaking. "Bishop won't let this go." Ryan tilted his head slightly. "Then I'll bury him next." A chill ran down Cruz's spine. There was no threat in Ryan's voice. No bravado. Just a promise. Cruz turned and ran. The aftermath. By dawn, the black vultures were gone. The ones who could still walk had dragged their unconscious men away. Cruz had limped back to Bishop's hideout, bruised, broken, and silent. When Bishop asked what happened, Cruz simply sat in a chair, staring blankly at the floor. He didn't answer. Didn't dare answer. Because he knew the truth. They hadn't just lost. They had never stood a chance. And now? Now Bishop had a choice. Escalate. Or disappear. Because if he made the wrong move, Ryan Carter wouldn't just fight back. He would end him. Bishop's last move. For 2 days after Cruz returned, the Black Vultures went silent. No bar fights. No drug deals. No reckless intimidation. Just silence. But it wasn't fear keeping them still. It was tension. Because Bishop wasn't the kind of man to let things go. And sure enough, on the third night, Bishop made his move. Not with an army. Not with an ambush. But with a deal. The meeting. The old warehouse on the edge of town was Bishop's real stronghold. Not the bars, not the clubhouses. Here, behind reinforced steel doors and armed guards, he built his empire. And tonight? Ryan and Jack Carter had been invited inside. They didn't sneak in. They didn't kick the doors down. They walked in. Past the guards, past the gang members watching from the shadows. The Carters didn't even flinch. Jack kept his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Ryan? Ryan barely blinked. Bishop sat at the head of a long table, his cigar smoldering in an ashtray. Cruz stood behind him, still bruised, his knuckles clenched tight. The room was quiet. Tense. Then Bishop spoke. You made your point. His voice was smooth, measured. You're dangerous. Both of you. Ryan didn't reply. Bishop exhaled a thin stream of smoke, studying the older man. I built something here. Took years. You think I'm gonna let two ghosts tear it apart? Jack tilted his head slightly. Sounds like you're saying you want to keep this going. Bishop smirked. I'm saying I have an offer. Ryan raised an eyebrow. I don't do business with dead men. The room went still. Jack fought the urge to smirk. His dad had just called Bishop a walking corpse to his face. Bishop chuckled lowly, tapping the cigar against the ashtray. I could send another crew, you know. More men. Heavier firepower. But something tells me you'd be expecting that. Ryan gave the smallest of nods. I would. Bishop leaned forward. Then let's cut the bullshit. I'm offering a truce. You stay in your lane, I stay in mine. No more problems. Ryan met his eyes, unreadable. And if I say no? Bishop's smirk faltered just slightly. Jack saw it. Bishop wasn't used to being in this position. He wasn't afraid yet. But he was aware. He knew that if he pushed too hard, Ryan wouldn't hesitate to end this. Finally, after a long pause, Bishop exhaled and leaned back. You win. Jack blinked. He hadn't expected Bishop to fold so easily. Ryan, however, wasn't surprised. Because he understood men like Bishop better than anyone. You'll never mention my son again, Ryan said. Not to your crew. Not to anyone. You'll pretend you never met us. Bishop gave a slow nod. Fair. And if you break that? Ryan's voice didn't change. No anger. No threats. Just certainty. I'll wipe you off the map. The room was ice cold. For the first time in his life, Bishop felt what it was like to be truly outmatched. So he extended a hand. Ryan didn't take it. Instead, he simply turned and walked away. Jack followed, casting one last glance at Cruz, who still looked like he wanted revenge but didn't dare move. And then, just like that, the Carters were gone. The aftermath. A week passed. The black vultures kept their distance. Rocco disappeared. Some said he left town. Others whispered that he had run, that he was too afraid of what would happen if he stayed. Cruz? He stayed with the gang. But something was different. His pride was shattered. His confidence? Gone. And Bishop? He did the one thing no one expected. He let it go. Because he knew one thing for certain. Ryan Carter wasn't just some ex-soldier. Jack Carter wasn't just some trained kid. They were monsters in their own right. And no war was worth fighting when you knew you were going to lose. Final scene. Back at the Carter cabin, Jack stood by the porch, hands in his pockets. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the trees. Ryan sat nearby, silently cleaning his old combat knife. Jack finally spoke. "Think it's over?" Ryan didn't look up. "For now." Jack smirked. "Shame. I was starting to have fun." Ryan chuckled lowly. "That's your mother's blood in you." Jack grinned. "What, you never enjoyed a fight?" Ryan's eyes glinted. "I enjoyed winning." Jack laughed. And for the first time in weeks, the Carters sat in peace. For now. Because trouble would always come knocking. But next time? The Carters would be ready. Like they always were.